Hello and welcome to Show Studios Autumn Winter 24 women's wear coverage. We are in London. I'm editor Hetty Mahlich and this is our fashion features editor, Joshua Graham.
Hi.
Josh and I both went into London, I think, not feeling that excited. I think fashion just feels quite bleak at the moment in general. And actually yesterday we saw some really brilliant things, so we're really excited to kind of kick off our women's wear coverage with London. London now only shows in February, so they weren't in January. They do kind of a co-ed schedule of both menswear and women's wear designers. And I began my day going to see Supriya Lele in Elephant and Castle. She has this gallery space there now, which is also kind of, I think she has her studio upstairs, but I might be wrong. It used to be this old pharmacy, so it's still kind of got the green pharmacy signs outside. Anyway, she did kind of press appointments to see her Autumn Winter 24 collection, which is also coming out as a lookbook. And it really set such a positive tone for me for the day. She was saying to me that she feels like her work always is intellectual, and I think that really stuck with me because so much of fashion now and so many designers kind of coming into the space, it feels so unthoughtful and thought about. It doesn't feel very intentional, but these clothes were totally that. You can feel that Supriya, you know, she was saying to me, you know, I'm a bit of a nerd, I love research, and these are clothes that, yeah, you can feel that intelligence in them, but they're not unapproachable or kind of not understandable. These were her best clothes, I think, best collection in a long time, but I think actually my favorite collection ever of Supriya's. She said this was her own favorite collection, and she returned to kind of the vinyl that she did in her first graduate collection, which is kind of this very pastel pink collection, but this time we had those vinyls in kind of brown, bright blue, kind of lapis lazuli. And I think that what that vinyl kind of represents is this return to kind of this visceral feeling, which has always been at the core of Supriya's brand. It's a very kind of, she launched the brand in 2017, and it's always been about this kind of subversive nature, and this visceral feeling of kind of fabrics and something revealing yet not revealing, something sexy, which is about a sexiness that's inherent to what the wearer feels, not what someone's observing of someone. And I think that very much comes from a woman designing for a woman. I was speaking to Karen Binns about this yesterday, and she really pointed out that actually Supriya really did actually lead the way for that kind of sexiness that we have as a trend in fashion, particularly with brands like Knowles, with Nancy Dojaka. So it's really exciting to see Supriya kind of, I feel like she's very much in control of her brand, what she wants to say. It feels intentional. This collection, you know, we had that return to vinyls, but also, as I was saying about visceral fabrications, it was also kind of about what does Supriya Lele look like in winter. So these kind of shaggy coats, then you had a contrast to kind of things like Indian paisley, then overlaid with this kind of metallic treatment, which creates this iridescence that reminded me of kind of the Barbie dolls you play with as a kid, and the kind of gaudy kind of fabrics that they'd be wearing. But in this context of how Supriya treats it with such an inherent sense of kind of touch and treatment, it's so beautiful. And yeah, it just has this kind of visceral kind of feeling you can imagine to when you wear this. Also in this collection, beautiful kind of knitwear, which almost was kind of like molten when you pick it up because it's so light. Kind of a bodysuit, a bandana, the contrast of that then to the leather, big oversized leather jackets, and then little leather kind of thong panties, which then she, Jane Howe, the amazing stylist who worked on this collection, styled together with the jacket tucked into that, and then the models were just wearing tights. So for me, I warned Josh that I was going to go on a monologue about this before we start, but I just had to do a little monologue on Supriya because for me, as a woman seeing these clothes, it just felt so sexy, and a woman designing for women. I just thought it was absolutely brilliant, and this is what we want from women's wear.
Yeah.
Now you can speak.
I completely agree. I think looking at fashion right now and looking at women's wear right now, something that I'm really interested in and find incredibly captivating is how sexuality and sensuality is being interpreted by these female designers.
Yeah.
There were elements of kink in this, from what I've seen, with those, like you said, those like leather
What's
panties.
frustrating is that we haven't actually received the lookbook at this point. We will once you see it, but Josh is just having to go off what I've told him and showed him.
And on Instagram from, but yeah, there was this, which I think is really fascinating for me, because I feel like we're coming out of a time where that raw sexual energy is maybe not in vogue when it comes to women's wear, and we're going into a place where there is an empowerment angle to it, that we're seeing that you can represent yourself like this and not feel like you're an object to be consumed, but rather taking complete ownership of it. And I think that's really a position that Supriya's taking and has always taken.
Yeah, and I think it's also important just to note also the conversation happening now about how many male designers there are at the helm of big houses in creative director positions. You know, we've had a lot of kind of changing of the guard, and it's a lot of men going into these positions. You know, Alexander McQueen, you know, all of these brands which very much are about women and power are being helmed by men, which is, you know, not to say it can't be done. Alexander McQueen himself did it. But I think there's a conversation about women not actually being in the position to design for other women. So that's why it's really exciting to see someone like Supriya do this.
Especially with Supriya, because like her design ethos has always been rooted in herself and what she wears and her uniform and the things that make her feel empowered and sexy. And we really can't not have that conversation when we talk about these male creative directors, because they can say as many times as they want in the press release that their collection that might be scantily clad is to empower the women around them, but unless it comes from
it just was
those
slightly
voices, right?
unbelievable and inauthentic.
Yeah.
Talking about people kind of designing for themselves, for their tribes, I think that was something we definitely felt at Fashion East.
Yes.
With Johanna, Parv and Olly
Olly.
Shinder.
We'll start with Johanna, because very similar to Supriya, she's a woman designing for women. She's really rooting her design language in her needs and how she navigates her wardrobe, how she navigates the world. I've interviewed Johanna a couple times, and her take on cycling sportswear has always been so pragmatic and rooted in practicality. This season, there were all the elements of that, but there was this almost cheeky, voyeuristic, again, rooted in a kinky place. The details on a lot of the garments had these ventilation zips on the back that revealed like just the tiniest keyhole on the back of the wear, which, how practical is that for ventilation? I don't know, but it's like a peek at flesh that is unexpected.
And it's not necessarily for anyone but yourself to know that that little peak, that little hole is there, you know?
Yeah. There was something really sexy about this. I know in the show notes, she said she wanted to take a darker, sultrier turn, and you definitely felt this compared to her first two collections. The way these super lightweight, airy, technical fabrics like clung to the models, I thought was incredibly sexy. I'm a fan.
Yeah, it felt really elevated this season. I felt like it's her last season with Fashion East, and it felt built up. It felt like a really full collection. There were a lot of looks, but all that felt intentional. You know, I'm going to go back to that word, intentional again. Yeah, so cohesive. And like I was saying for Supriya, it felt like these are clothes that women can wear, will want to wear, but that are also adding something interesting to the conversation. Then it's not stuff, it's intentional, good clothing.
Yeah. With that being said, there was also Olly Shinder, who I'm a huge fan of. His work is really rooted in his own clubbing experiences in Berlin, and that really came out in this collection. It was incredibly sexy, it was incredibly kinky. He works really well with workwear and kind of these mundane masculine archetypes, but these really hyper masculine archetypes, and queers them in such as a gay man, captivating and fascinating and really sexy way for me. This collection was really looking at almost this seedy underbelly of masculine sexuality. So a lot of the looks had these galvanized rubber arm coverings and leg coverings that immediately shot me into like kink mode and like S&M. One of the models was wearing this like latex skin tight number, and he had makeup on that was dabbled to make it look like he was like bruised from what? I mean, that's up to the observer. But it is really playing with this heightened...
I thought that was a birthmark.
No, I saw on Instagram the makeup artist was like dabbing these blues and purples to make it look like...
That's so interesting, I didn't know that.
Fighting, I'll leave it up to your imagination. But I find it really interesting that he's taking these maybe underground subculture, as a gay man, kind of normal for me, but I know for so many people it's like crazy and obscene and hyper aggressive and violent. So I think looking at this collection, it might be easy to misunderstand where Olly is coming from, but his work is so rooted in community and his circle and his experiences in club life in Berlin that I don't think we should or can read it as violent or scary violent. So the art direction was from a London-based artist, Novocaine, who he's worked with very closely. The soundtrack was by artist Wolfgang Tillmans, which is amazing.
So iconic. And he was there as well. I was just like obsessed.
They work together really closely. So there is Olly's work is like a real love letter to that community, and kind of bringing to the surface or elevating those aesthetics within a high fashion context, which I am really captivated by. I find it incredibly... How many times am I going to say sexy in this interview? I find it incredibly sexy. One of my favorite looks was his take on office wear. So they were these button-ups with these exaggerated collars, but this three-dimensional trompe l'oeil effect tie that I thought was so smart. A must for my wardrobe. I'm actually obsessed.
I also thought that tracksuit was really clever. It's the first time I've seen her do a tracksuit that's been interesting in forever. Like, he did these kind of slits through them, which kind of revealed underlayers, and just the way it was made and the structure of it and how that fit into this collection. It felt, sexy,
cohesive,
but clever. It was really honestly clever. The first tracksuit I've seen in a long time that I thought was interesting.
And it felt like, I mean, where it's coming from and the inspirations behind it might not feel incredibly approachable for everyone. But when you strip back all of these elements, like, these clothes are really well done. These clothes are really... There's an ability to imbue them into wardrobes, no matter
I also
who you are.
think, from what you're saying, it's really important. I think sometimes people just look at runway images and take it as point blank sometimes and put on prejudice or kind of very surface level readings of stuff, and I think it's really important actually to consider the world where this comes from. Like, Olly was just in Berlin when I was there last week doing a kind of installation with Shane Oliver as part of his kind of anonymous club. They did this kind of mall of anonymous, and Olly had clothes set up there. And I think what you were saying about community, you know, you can see how he's embedded in that community, but then comes to London where he studied at St Martin's and he's kind of grown up and does something there which also feels intrinsic there, and it is about the people who make this up. And it's, I think if you don't understand this, maybe it's not necessarily for you, but you shouldn't pass judgment on that.
Yeah, exactly. And I would even apply that to someone like Supriya or someone like Johanna. I think we need to look at the perspective that's putting things out.
Yeah, it matters, it's important.
Yeah, it absolutely matters.
Should we finish with talking about Chet?
Yeah.
Spiky, wonderful Chet, who is kind of one of the hottest kind of fashion phenomenons of the last few years. Everyone's obsessed with Chet for his kind of signature knitwear, spiky knitwear. He's done, you know, partnerships now with people like Smart Water, with Zendaya on the kind of covering the campaign. It's, you know, Doja Cat's worn it. You know, it's a big kind of phenomenon, futuristic, playful, all of these wonderful things. But I actually think Chet's lent into something slightly darker in the past few seasons, and both in terms of aesthetic, but also I think, you know, if we're talking about the progression of Chet, aesthetically I think it's leaning into something darker, but it's also about how do you, when you have something so signature like a spike, how do you build that brand out and that kind of brand image and aesthetic and not be pinholed with
Yeah.
that and build it out. And I think for this kind of fourth collection since leaving Fashion East, this was about introducing some more of those new themes and ideas, kind of fabrications like degradé velvet, silver kind of discs throughout the latter part of the collection, this kind of painted effect which cracked and was actually kind of this idea of the oxidization of terracotta army sculptures, which Chet was kind of obsessed with when he was younger. So I think it's definitely, this season was about refining and not moving away but from the spikes, but not being trapped by the spikes.
Yeah. I'm admittedly a Chet Lo skeptic, or I was before the show, because I always thought, well, how far can you take this? How far can you take this really hyper saturated, playful motif and bridge it within this sphere of fashion? But what I think he did really well this season, and you said he's going into darker territory, this collection was called Terracotta, and it was based off of the Terracotta Army, but that really plays into ideas of, you know, mortality and what's left when you're gone. And relating that to these spikes is almost like, if this is his legacy, how is he gonna make sure it's solidified within the fashion zeitgeist and the fashion canon? With these darker themes, I think he's also really elevating his ideas. So there were elements of play in the spiky knitwear, but it was also maybe restrained and pulled back. One of the looks was this red maroon dress, and
beautiful.
Gorgeous. And the spikes were, I think, oversized compared to usual, and they almost look like flowers, like petals, or even like draconic scales.
Yeah, I love that.
And it was very different from, I think, what we've seen from him before. It felt really grown up, and it felt like really beautiful.
And that kind of meddled with kind of almost kilt, like kind of tailored skirts or apron details, which we've kind of seen before, but pushing kind of those more tailored pieces and showing how knitwear, which you don't often think of as something so structured, but definitely in the Chet world is with these spikes, how that can work within that. And I think it's also kind of, I think I think it's about kind of capturing how do you progress on something like a spike. I think you think about what was the sensibility behind my graduate collection, behind those early collections. Yes, it was, I think people read it as something kind of fun, but I think it's also about something that's intentional. We're going to go back to all those words, intentional, really well made and well crafted, really well kind of refined, and something that goes back to feeling, you know, Chet, you'll always see him wearing his own clothes. It's about something that he wants to wear that relates to him and his friends. And I think if you stay close to what that sensibility is, that's how you progress away from such a signature aesthetic. And I think we're seeing Chet slowly building that up. And, you know, he works with Jeannie, the amazing stylist. And I think you've got to have that right team around you to help you in those early stages of a brand build up that world.
Yeah, and it wasn't just spikes.
Yeah, you know,
there was really great evening wear, this like liquid metal fabrication that I thought was like incredibly sensual when the models
like a
walked
knit,
down.
wasn't it? It was really beautiful. It was like
and
molten.
the end were these like scale paillettes almost that looked like armor, or again this like really
molten silver, like really beautiful.
Yeah. And it is the year of the dragon for Lunar New Year, and I felt a lot of that come through with this collection, which I really appreciated.
No, it was a great collection.
Great.
And yeah, I think, I mean, we want to finish by quickly talking about Central St. Martin's because
we loved it.
And, you know, thinking about us going into London and not feeling sure about how exciting it was going to be, and just feeling a bit meh about fashion at the moment. What's more inspiring than to go to an MA graduate show and be really inspired by the next generation of designers coming out? I'm just going to get on my Instagram and just read out the designers that I've started following, to be really open and honest with you, because these are the ones that I was really excited about. I think I'm going to summarize again. They felt intentional. They felt incredibly well made.
Really refined. I was not expecting it to feel that like...
The like pattern cutting, everything to all of these designers was
phenomenal.
Like, phenomenal. Really, really brilliant. My favourites were Phoebe Pendergast, Joshua Awuzie, Renato Barras, Paula Mihovilovic, Flora Kajia, Lovro Lukic, Traceline. Yeah, those are my top faves.
I really loved Maximilian Rayner. Incredibly theatrical. It was like, it was playing with a lot of kind of the cliches of London fashion, almost DIY'd, but the way he did it felt incredibly refined. And coming off that Margiela couture show, there was a real theatricality to it that I think fashion should be steering towards. So I appreciated that.
Yeah, I think, you know, I haven't prepped notes on all of those designs I just said, but I think what stood out to me was there were new ideas. It didn't feel reductive or, you know, obviously brands and designers are going to influence people, like, that's fine. But none of it felt copy and paste. It felt original. It felt exciting. There were new silhouettes and new ideas that I hadn't seen before, and made me felt interested and excited about clothing. And that's exactly what a really good fashion collection should do. So I think we were both just left feeling really excited about this group of designers and about fashion.
And we came in really tired because the show was at 9.
9 p.m. we were really knackered.
Yeah.
And this, I'm so glad that it just woke me right up again. I was really excited about it.
My favorite part though was at the very end when the students walked out with their collections, because they looked like they made that. Like they were embodying what they're creating and their aesthetic and their point of view, and I thought that was phenomenal.
No, I think we left on a really, really happy note. Thank you for joining us. We'll be back every single day with a roundup of the London shows. So join us then. Leave any questions or comments here below, and we will try and get back to you in the next round of reviewing. So thanks for joining. Bye.